Good morning, everybody. Nice to see so many faces early in the morning after the great party yesterday. I hope you all enjoyed the party yesterday. Okay. My name is Nico Köbler. I'm a freelance consultant from Germany, and my Twitter profile tells me I'm doing stuff with computers. And today I want to talk about isomorphic JavaScript, there's now on and React.js. Sounds great technology, you will see. And these are my contact coordinates, my email address, website, blog, and my Twitter handle. And as you can imagine, I always like to be mentioned on Twitter, so if you don't mind, yeah, I would appreciate this. Yes, I'm talking about Java and JavaScript, and you all know that Java is to JavaScript as to hamster. But as Jeff Atwood wrote in his Principle of Least Power, and it became public as Atwood's Law, he says that any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. And yes, I think eat this, and I will show you how to combine Java and JavaScript in a perfect way. Yes, JavaScript is the language of the web, and the web itself has evolved through the last years. It all began with websites linking documents statically together. And about 10 or 12 years ago, we had this weird Ajax websites. Who of you likes Ajax? No one? Me neither. And today we're talking about highly functional web applications like Facebook, all the others, using lots of JavaScript in the browser. And so JavaScript has become the app runtime, and at least in the browser, and also it's available everywhere you go today. Even in my car, there's JavaScript. A few years ago, I was concerned about running Windows in my car, and today I'm concerned or not concerned about running JavaScript in my car. I don't know where this is going. Yeah. What does isomorphic mean? It's coming from the Greek, isos, it's equal, morph, shape, so it means the equal shape, the same shape. And it's heavily used in mathematics, and the math people are a bit strange. They're defining isomorphic if something is really related to an isomorphism. So this says nothing for us. Try a more general approach, isomorphic JavaScript. If you look at the same entity, in our case, the code, in two different contexts, for us, the client and the server, we should get the same thing, the same result, the same HTML, the same DOM elements. So, same entity, code, on client and server, the same result. Is this possible? We'll see. Isomorphic JavaScript is also known as universal JavaScript, as isomorphic is a really strange expression, and then some people say, no, you have to call it universal JavaScript. There were other people saying that universal JavaScript is too generic, and today we talk about isomorphic universal JavaScript. I don't know if that's even better. But if you read about isomorphic JavaScript or universal JavaScript, it's pretty the same. And what are the use cases for isomorphic JavaScript? Of course, internationalization using the same messages on the client and the server side. That's the easiest thing. Validation, input validation. Think if you have written a really complex validation algorithm for your website. This is based on JavaScript. And now the user turns off JavaScript and passes the values straight to the server. Your complete validation is gone, and you have to re-implement it on your server-side language. You have twice the effort. So think about reusing the same algorithm on the client and on the server side. And of course, templating and creating the UI for the user. This can be done in the same way on the client and on the server. Why should we use the same code on the client and the server? Of course, the try principle. Don't repeat yourself. Why should I write the same logic twice? Why should I maintain it twice or more than once? And why should I use different technologies for the same approach when I can do it in one technology and it fits best? And of course, I have only one single point of truth, or even in case of failure, one single point of failure, where I have to look and fix the error. When you build a modern single-page web application, you often see this when the page is loading. You're calling the page, the JavaScript libraries have to be loaded, you're waiting, the page is rendering, and after a few seconds, you're bothered and you go away. And this is what really matters, the wait time matters. And there were, Redbear made what's it called? You know what I mean? Some research since the 90s. And since 6 years, there's this 3-second rule. If you don't show your content to the users in at least 3 seconds, the users will go away from your website. And this is even how Google sees your website if you're building a pure single-page web application with JavaScript, with AngularJS, or whatever. You have an empty website, just a title, an empty body, just a JavaScript library, and even if Google knows to process, to evaluate JavaScript, you don't know if Google does it right, if Google does it in the way you want it to do. So your search engine optimization is going to zero. User experience in SEO, I already mentioned, by rendering on the server. Performance can also be a good point because it takes very long to present the user the first content. And also, there are lots of Internet Explorer 7 out there in the world, I think. I think we get rid of the Internet Explorer 6. Perhaps in China there are some Internet Explorer 6 also. And, but the legacy browsers aren't able to render single-page applications in a proper way, like modern browsers are able to do it. So perhaps you should render your content on the server side and deliver it to the client. And there are also reasons to render the content on the client side. Of course, there's user experience. You can render only parts of the page, which is much more faster than sending the whole request to the server and responding with the whole page to the client. And you have other possibilities to create your content on the client side with JavaScript, with transitions, with animations, whatever you like. And you don't have these possibilities on the server side. So perhaps a mixture of both is the best way to deliver your content. And so isomorphic comes into the play. And the best approach might be if the user requests a URL the first time, the server fetches the content, renders the content to response, and sends it to the user, to the client. And while the user enjoys the content, your JavaScript application can be initialized on the clients. And after that, if a user navigates to a different URL, your client can fetch the content and render the page. And after the client is initialized, fifth point, the application is running on the client. So isomorphic apps sound awesome. But what if I'm in a Java environment? Yeah, I have different options. I can delegate the execution of JavaScript to a Node.js process, but there are drawbacks. I have a more complicated deployment, and the performance might not be the best. So let's use Node.js as a smart proxy in front of our Java environment. The same drawbacks. I have to deploy one more system, at least one more system, and performance is another thing. So let's use Nashorn for the win. Nashorn is running JavaScript on the JVM. I think Nashorn is already more than 2 years old. You all know Nashorn, so I don't have to go deep into Nashorn. And but there are some things to consider when using Nashorn. Nashorn and concurrency. In browsers, you don't have to think of concurrency. Your JavaScript in the browser is executed single-threaded. So everything is okay. And many of the Node.js packages and libraries don't think of concurrency because they don't have to think of. But in Nashorn, it's possible to execute JavaScript concurrently in more than one thread. So you have to think of concurrency problems. And there are popular JavaScript libraries like React.js, like Handlebars, which are not thread safe for our usage. So every time you you're executing JavaScript on the JVM, you should use thread local of your script engine so that every execution is thread safe. And as Nashorn is only a pure JavaScript engine, it lacks of some variables, functions, which a browser has and which Node.js has. So there's no global variable, there's no window variable. Some Node.js libraries need a process element with an included environment object. So you have to build polyfills for it. And even the console function is not available in Nashorn. Nashorn uses a print function for printing out statements to standard out. And so you have to polyfill these functions. And this might be a good example for reusing JavaScript on the client and the server side for password validation. You have your input field in the browser, and there's a JavaScript code in the browser for scoring your password strength and then deciding if the password is valid or not. The function is called as password valid. And now you could use the same function in JavaScript, in Java, sorry. You have a method is password valid with the parameter password, and then you just invoke the function is password valid in Nashorn, which is this function. And of course, you have to load it before. Nashorn doesn't know the function if you don't load it into the context. But you just can pass the password to the JavaScript function, return the Boolean value, and work with it in Java code. Based on this, I made some experiments with React.js. React.js is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces invented by Facebook, and it's not a library for, or it's not a full stack framework for building web apps. It's just the view layer. If you think of MVC or MVC, it's just the view layer of all this. And React.js became very popular because, on the one hand side, it's invented by Facebook. If it's invented by Facebook or Netflix today, it must be cool. You agree? Yeah. And React.js allows to update your DOM in the browser without flickering. So React.js makes usage of a virtual DOM and building diffs on the real DOM and the virtual DOM and just replacing the parts which are different and not replacing whole DOM trees in the browser. And also React.js supports server-side rendering. So it's possible with the React.js from native to render the content on the server. And React.js makes use of a JavaScript dialect which is called JSX. And JSX is a bit strange at the first glance. So there are only people who love it and people who hate it. I hated it in the first days, and now I think I'm coming to the thing, I'm loving it. This is how JSX looks. You have JavaScript, and in this JavaScript you have some HTML fragments. Looks weird, looks strange, very strange. And also mixed. This is HTML tag, and this is JavaScript properties. And yeah, you have to be used to it. It takes some time. And this JSX can be rendered to pure JavaScript because JSX can't be executed by modern browsers today. And you can transpile it to pure JavaScript functions. It looks like this. You have React, create class, create elements, all your elements you want on your page. And this is the HTML which will be produced by this function. And as you can see, there are some data React ID tags in it. With these React IDs, React.js is able to recognize which parts of the DOM has changed and which parts has to be updated. And the transpilation from JSX to JS is done with Bubble.js, and since the middle of the last year it was done with JSX Transformer. This was a library from Facebook, and this was replaced with Bubble because Bubble is much more powerful, and also Bubble.js supports transpiling ECMAScript 7 functions to ECMAScript 5, which runs in every browser. Okay, if you have any deeper questions into React.js, there's a talk this afternoon, I think at 2 o'clock, I don't know exactly, introducing React.js. And as I said, React.js only is the view part of your web application. There's also an architecture approach for React.js applications called Flux. And it goes a straightforward way, because React.js does not support two-way binding of variables. And React.js is straightforward. You have actions, and your actions define what you want to do. And in your actions, you can call external services to retrieve data, to store data, whatever. And then you have a dispatcher which knows how to how to change your application state. And this dispatcher is the only fragment which will change your application state. And your application state is stored in a so-called store. This is the complete application state. And the store is responsible to render your view. And if you have any changes in your view will dispatch an action. The action goes to the dispatcher, and so on. And if an architecture is called Flux, there are some frameworks called Marty.js, McFly.js, or whatever. But the most popular implementation of Flux is Redux at the moment. It's the most powerful library to build up applications with React.js. But this is just a hint. I don't go into deep of Flux, and my demo also doesn't include the Flux architecture. Okay, just mention it. There are some Spring MVC, some Spring Boot MVC demos out there. I don't show these Spring applications because I've built a demo using the new Java EE8 MVC framework, the action-based framework, and will be available with the next Java EE version. And I built the OSAC React view engine, which is React.js based. OSAC supports different view engines for different view technologies. So the base standard are, of course, JSP and what is it called? Don't know. And there are also implementations for string template, for handlebars, for thime leaf, for whatever. And I tried to build up a React.js based view engine for React, for OSAC. And you can find it, of course, in my GitHub profile if you want to try it out. And now we'll switch to the application. Here we go. And I just want to start it and show you what it does. And in the first run, this is a pure server-side, pure client-side running a React.js application. It's based on the official React.js tutorial. Just a list of books, and I can add new books. Dan Brown, Illuminati. And the books can be retrieved also with a REST call from the server and updated in the server with a REST call, and the client is rendered purely on the client side. And if we have a look into the source code, you see nothing. There are just, okay, can do it a bit bigger. There are some JavaScript libraries. I'm using the React.js, jQuery for ease of use of the REST calls. And there's an empty container div, and there's the bookbox.js, that's the actual application itself. And there's a function which calls render client and has some data in it. No more. This is what Google sees. Not the best thing. And React.js builds up the UI with these data, and it will look like this. And the Dan Brown book, the Illuminati, you won't see in the source because it wasn't there when we rendered the page. When we now update the page, also our Dan Brown book will appear because this data is fetched from the server when the page is rendered. So what did I do? This is just a controller with this new add controller annotation. It tells the server that this is a MVC controller, not a JavaScript controller. And I just get from the service my books. The service itself is just a very stupid service with initial books and some add and get methods. I get the books from the service and write these books as a JSON string to the data tag in my model and return the React JSP. And the React JSP looks pretty similar to that what you saw in the browser. Just our libraries, the container div, and our bookbox.js, and also the render client method with the data placeholder. So let's have a look how we can change this. Don't need this method, but now we need this method. And yeah, into this. Now with the React View Engine, I'm also using the books from the servers, but I put the plain Java object with Java list of books to the models and calling the React View Engine, which is recognized by the React prefix of the return value. And this is the React View Engine. This is a much more simplified version of the View Engine. The View Engine you will find in GitHub is much more powerful, much more flexible. This is just for demo reasons, just a bit simplified. And every View Engine in MVC needs a supports method, which is used to recognize the outcome of the controller method. And because our controller method starts with a React, this is the prefix for the View Engine. And if the view starts with our prefix, then the supports method returns true, and OSARC or MVC knows to use this specific View Engine. And then in the process view method, the actual magic begins. We get the template out of the view context. This is the return value, and I extract everything after the view prefix, and this is the template. So the template will be React JSP. I get the model object from the context, and I put the list of books to the data tag, and now I have the data, and I will call an instance of a React class to render the data. And after I rendered the data, I will go into this in a few seconds. I put the content, the string content, to the models map. And also I will do the JSON string of the data to the data tag, the same thing we saw before. And this is my React class. There I have the thread local of a script engine. I'm getting a new script engine, Nashorn, and I will fill I will initialize Nashorn with my libraries. This is the Nashorn polyfill I need for the functions that are not available in Nashorn. The React.js, I'm using a Showdown.js library for rendering the content. And last but not least, the actual application, the book.js, and I will read all this into Nashorn so that everything is aware in Nashorn. And with my method render, I'm calling at this point React render. I'm just calling a function called render server, which is located in our bookbox.js, and I will tell that this will be a string, and we'll get return the string value of the result. And if I have a look into the bookbox.js, there's a method called render server, which gets an argument books, which is the Java list of books, actually. And this is because we have to convert it from Java, from the list, Java list, into a JavaScript variable. So we can pass it to any other JavaScript function. We call the React render to string method, which is a built-in function of React, and telling you should render a bookbox element with the data and some other arguments for updating the content. We'll see later, and that's it. And in fact, it's pretty similar to the render client function which we had before, which only runs on the client, and this also calls a render function in React, which will call also a bookbox with data and some other arguments, and put the rendered bookbox into an element which has the ID content. This is the only difference between client and server. The rest of the code is the same. And we have, so this is our bookbox. We're creating a React class, having some functions, what we want to do if a new book is submitted, call an Ajax function. There's a method to load books from the server, and some initial state, and some other React stuff. And last we have the function render, and with render we can render the actual HTML output of this class, of this bookbox class. And in our bookbox we have also a book list and a book form, which is in here, our book list, which will render a list of books. And we have our book class, and also we have our book form to add new books. And this is transpiled to JavaScript. So this is the pretty similar code, render client function, React render, and now we have pure React code, pure JavaScript code, create element, a bookbox, and here render to string, we create element, a bookbox, which is specified above. And now the bookbox looks pretty similar as plain JavaScript code. So if we stick all this together and rerun the server, and now we're using the server-side pre-rendered React template, delivering it to the client. So there it goes. And we have the same page. Of course, our Dan Brown book is no more there because I restarted the server and the repository is only in memory. But if I now have a look into the source code, I will see some more content which is rendered. And this is rendered on the server, delivered to the client. This is all the HTML which is rendered on the server, delivered to the client, and because there's already a React ID, it's possible to reinitialize the application on the client side with this function, because this function render client will be evaluated also, because it's there on the client, and the client will evaluate it. But React knows, because there are React IDs already, that the data is there, and React doesn't have to re-render the content again. But the React application is initialized on the client. And if I now close this, if I now add Dan Brown, it's in the list. But of course, it's not in our source code, because the source code is the state we got from the server when we did the request the first time. And if you do now a reload of the page, now it is, because you're requesting a complete new state from the server of your application. So you see the Dan Brown Illuminati is in our data for the render client method, and it's also Dan Brown Illuminati in the source code. And what if I have another client? Just using this. This is another client, and I'm adding my book. What is not written, what I want to write since 2 years, but there's no time. I can add it to the list, and because the application pulls every 5 seconds to the server if there's new data, it's also added to our first client. And React just adds the node, the DOM node for the new book. All other DOM elements are not reflected. And if you have now a look into this source code, we have still no book of mine in here, but it will be rendered because the client got the data from the REST request. Okay. So, what's next? I'm thinking of using AS6 with the upcoming Java 9. So Nashorn will support hopefully many ES6 functions. I don't know if Nashorn will really support all ES6 functions or just a few. But it's already on its way, and there are already ES6 functions available in current JDK versions of JDK 8. Some backports in it. There are, of course, previews of Java 9 which you can use. And yeah, you can think of using TypeScript for your JavaScript applications. So I have typed JavaScript. And Angular 2 is coming. Angular 2 also supports server-side rendering. So you can combine Nashorn, JVM, and Angular 2. And I have to think a bit about the routing problem. Because in a single-page web application, you have no real paths. This is the virtual routing. You specify routes to specify your content, but these routes are just available in the client, and you have to synchronize in any way the client-side routes with the server-side routes, because the server doesn't know of any routes configured in the client. So this might differ, and this might be some work to do. Okay. We saw that JavaScript is a real powerful language which evolves, and the frameworks are becoming more and more popular, and it's really a no-brainer today, or a small brainer today, to use it in large enterprise projects. There's React, there's Angular 2 coming, there's Ember 2, which is also very powerful. And with isomorphic applications, I think we can combine the best of our two worlds. The server-side part, server-side rendering, delivering the content, static content, through the client to search engines to whatever. And with the client side of rendering, we can build up a real good user experience. And there are already solutions you can use in your daily work based on Spring Boot MVC or Java EE MVC. So, if you have any questions, I will try to answer. No questions? Yeah. Yes. Not necessarily. The question was, how do I transpile the JSX to JavaScript? I need Node, not explicitly. I can implicitly use Node and transpile it. And there was an error to use bubble in Nashorn. And this should be fixed with the current update 73, 72, 74, I don't know exactly. So you should be able to load bubble into Nashorn and convert the JSX with Nashorn to JavaScript. I didn't try it because the update is pretty new, but it's on my to-do list to do exactly this, to transpile the JSX in Nashorn directly with Bubble.js. So long I did it with the use of implicit use of Node.js with a Gradle plugin to transpile it. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? So I think I made all of you happy. You will go out and build isomorphic web apps. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.